Lydia stood in front of the glass curtain wall of the skyscraper, looking up at the building towering into the clouds. The sunlight was dazzling, so she squinted her eyes. 5 years had passed, and the city had become almost unrecognizable. She carried a worn-out canvas bag, wearing clothes that were the most popular 5 years ago but now long outdated. Passing by a glass display window, she caught a glimpse of her reflection, a gaunt face, slightly pale skin, with only those eyes remaining bright and resolute, as if the 5 years had not extinguished the flame in her heart. Today was her release day from prison, and no one came to pick her up. The prison gates slowly closed behind her, emitting a heavy metallic clanging sound. 5 years ago, she had been taken away by police car from the city's most bustling district, surrounded by onlookers, with reporters' flashes nearly blinding her. 5 years later, she stood alone on the street, like a leaf drifting in the wind, unnoticed by anyone. She took a deep breath, the air filled with car exhaust and the aroma from the corner bakery. The taste of freedom, she had almost forgotten it. The air in prison always carried a mixture of disinfectant and mold, unchanging through the seasons. "Miss, do you need help?" A young boy noticed her standing there for a long time and kindly asked. He was about 18 or 19, wearing a trendy hoodie, with a face of unworldly innocence. Lydia shook her head, forcing a slight smile. "No, thank you." Her voice was somewhat hoarse, having not engaged in normal conversation with strangers for too long. She dragged her simple luggage toward the bus stop. Her wallet contained only a small amount of subsidy from the prison and an expired ID card. 5 years of isolation from the world made her feel like an alien who had just landed on another planet. The shared bikes on the streets, electronic payment signs, and ubiquitous QR codes all felt unfamiliar to her. The bus slowly pulled into the stop, and Lydia fumbled to insert coins and board. Inside the bus, passengers were all heads down looking at their phones, the screen lights illuminating expressionless faces. 5 years ago, smartphones were still a luxury for the few. Now, they had become an extension of everyone's body. She felt like an antique crawling out of a time tunnel. Lydia found a window seat and sat down, gazing at the street scenes rushing by outside. Skyscrapers had risen from the ground, familiar neighborhoods had become strange, and even the bus routes had added many new stops. In her 5-year absence, the city had surged forward at an almost arrogant pace, paying no heed to her falling behind. Tech Park Station has arrived, passengers getting off, please prepare. Hearing this station name, Lydia's heart skipped a beat. Tech Park, that was where her dreams had begun. The doors opened, and she involuntarily stood up and got off. Standing at the entrance of Tech Park, Lydia felt as if she had returned to 8 years ago in a daze. At that time, fresh out of university, she and Victor had harbored dreams of changing the world, renting a small office less than 50 square meters here to found Chinchao Technology. The name was taken from one character each from their names, symbolizing that their union was not only of love but also of dreams. "We want to build China's top artificial intelligence company." Victor had held her hand then, his eyes sparkling with idealistic light. "Not just China, the whole world," she had added with a smile, believing that as long as they had each other, nothing was impossible. Back then, crammed in the tiny office, eating instant noodles and pulling all-nighters coding, they felt the whole world was at their feet. 8 years had passed, and Chinchao Technology had become CS Technology, with offices moved to the most luxurious building in the city center. Yet she herself had gone from co-founder to an ex-convict. Victor had erased all traces of her existence, symbolizing that her presence had been ruthlessly kicked away like a pebble. Lydia shook her head with a bitter smile and turned to leave. "Lydia?" An uncertain voice came from behind. Her body stiffened, and she slowly turned around. In front of her stood a slightly plump middle-aged man in a security uniform, his face showing surprise and uncertainty. Time had left marks on his face, but Lydia still recognized him, the old security guard at Tech Park, Peter. "Peter?" Lydia recognized the other party, the old security guard at Tech Park, who used to greet them with a smile and sometimes leave the door open for them, as they often worked late into the night during the early startup days. "It's really you. Long time no see." Peter's face broke into a smile, but it quickly became awkward. I heard you, you're out. His voice lowered, as if mentioning it was an offense. News travels fast. Lydia forced a smile, just out today. Peter rubbed his hands, seeming unsure what to say. Are you okay? Need any help? I'm fine, thanks. Lydia paused and suddenly asked, what about Chinchou technology, how is it now? Peter's expression became even more unnatural. Oh, they moved out long ago, now they're really impressive, in the most upscale office building in the city center, and I heard the company went public. He lowered his voice. Victor is a big boss now, often on TV. Married the chairman's daughter, a true winner in life. Lydia's heart sank, but her face remained calm. That's great. She felt a wave of nausea. Victor had not only stolen her company but also further consolidated his position through marriage. Peter glanced at his watch. I have to go on patrol. You, take care. He hurried away, as if afraid of too much contact with her. The once friendly acquaintance now avoided her like the plague. Lydia stood in place, feeling a chill rise from the bottom of her heart. This was the world she would face. Everyone knew her crime, and everyone avoided her. Victor had not only taken her 5 years of freedom but also her reputation and social status. She looked up at the tallest building in Tech Park. The top floor had once been their first office. There, she and Victor had spent countless sleepless nights, arguing over a piece of code, cheering for a breakthrough, sharing the same lunchbox, and envisioning the same future. Those memories had been her greatest solace in prison, but now they had become the sharpest blades, tearing at her heart. All those days and nights had ultimately resulted in a verdict and 5 years of imprisonment. Lydia clenched her fists, her nails digging deep into her palms. The pain made her alert, reminding her of her purpose in returning, not to reminisce about the past, but to reclaim what was rightfully hers. Back in the rented small single room, Lydia took out an old iron box from her bag. This was a personal item given to her by her lawyer before entering prison. For 5 years, she had kept it hidden at the bottom of her prison bunk, only daring to take it out for a look in the dead of night. The edges of the iron box had been smoothed by rubbing, and the patterns on it were almost indistinguishable. The iron box was rusted, with slightly deformed edges. She carefully opened it, containing everything from before her imprisonment, a university graduation photo, a few coins, and a photo that had been torn and meticulously pasted back together, her and Victor on their university graduation day. In the photo, Victor had his arm around her shoulder, both smiling brightly, with the sign of their jointly founded Chinchou Technology studio in the background. At that time, they were hailed as the golden boy and jade girl of the startup world. Lydia gently stroked her young face in the photo. How could she have imagined back then that just 3 years later, the person she trusted most would personally push her into the abyss? From an innocent and naive girl, she had become a prisoner, and now a homeless marginal person. The scene from that day was still vivid in her mind. Police burst into the company, taking her away under the shocked gazes of all employees on charges of embezzlement of funds and commercial fraud. The evidence was irrefutable. There were fund transfer documents approved with her signature, huge sums deposited into her personal account, and Victor's testimony as the whistleblower. Why? Before being taken away, she stared fixedly into Victor's eyes, hoping to see a trace of guilt or explanation. But Victor's gaze was cold as ice, even carrying a subtle hint of triumph. But he just averted his gaze and said to the police, "Please handle it quickly, the company still needs to operate normally." His voice was chillingly calm, as if discussing something unrelated to him. In court, she defended herself hoarsely, but all evidence pointed to her. Handwriting experts confirmed the signatures on the documents were authentic, bank records showed the huge sums had indeed been transferred to her account, and even her most capable assistant testified in court, saying she often conducted special financial operations privately. Later, she realized everyone had been bought or threatened by Victor. The most fatal blow came from Victor. He appeared in court in a plain suit, with a pained expression and choked tone. "I never thought Lydia would do such a thing. We were not only partners but also people who once loved each other. It wasn't until the audit revealed huge deficits in the accounts that I had to face this cruel reality. His performance won the jury's sympathy, while her defense seemed pale and powerless. Ultimately, Lydia was sentenced to 5 years in prison. When the judge announced the verdict, she turned to look at the gallery, and her parents' disappointed eyes still pierced her heart to this day. From that day on, her parents never visited her again. "I didn't do it." In their last meeting before imprisonment, she gripped the bars of the visitation window, her nails turning white from the force. That was her final struggle, her last hope. Victor, across the glass, had a sad but firm gaze. "Lydia, admit it, I'll wait for you to come out." His lie was so realistic that Lydia at the time almost believed he was sincerely thinking of her. She would never forget his seemingly sorrowful but actually hypocritical expression. At that moment, she understood the treachery of human hearts. 5 years of prison life had smoothed her edges but not extinguished her hatred. Every day, she planned how to reclaim what was hers and make the betrayer pay. The harsh life in prison did not break her, instead, it forged her iron will. Now, she was back. Lydia felt a small USB drive from the bottom of the iron box and held it in her palm. It contained the company server data she had unintentionally backed up back then, her only hope to clear her name. Though small, the USB drive might contain the power to overturn everything. A week before imprisonment, she noticed some abnormal fluctuations in the company's finances and quietly backed up the server data, intending to study it carefully, but unexpectedly, she was arrested before she could check it. In prison, she recalled this unconscious act countless times. It might be heaven's only lifeline for her. She was grateful for her caution back then, it became her only trump card for a comeback. But she was not in a hurry to bring it out. First, she needed to see what kind of person Victor had become now, how many resources and power he held. Rash actions would only alert the enemy, she needed to formulate a meticulous plan. Lydia flipped out the long-saved phone number and dialed it. She knew this number by heart. It had once been her emergency contact, but now it was her enemy's. "Hello, who is this?" A familiar voice came from the other end, gentle and refined, just as before. Victor was always like that, polite on the surface, but cold and ruthless inside. "It's me, Lydia. I'm out." Her voice was calm, without any emotional fluctuation. 5 years of prison life had taught her to control her emotions and not easily reveal her inner thoughts. There was a long silence on the other end, then a faint surprised tone. "Lydia. You're out? Why didn't you tell me in advance so I could pick you up?" His voice carried deliberate enthusiasm, as if they were still intimate partners. "No need." Her voice was cold as ice. "I want to see you." She had to observe him face to face, to assess what kind of opponent this former partner had become. After another silence, Victor gave an address for a cafe. "See you in an hour," he added, with a subtle hint of tension in his tone. Hanging up the phone, Lydia carefully dressed up. She put on her favorite skirt from 5 years ago, though somewhat outdated, it still fit. She wanted to face the man who had ruined her life in her best state. The self in the mirror was much slimmer than 5 years ago, with fine lines at the corners of her eyes recording the passage of time, but her gaze was sharper, like a polished diamond. She arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early and chose a window seat. This position allowed her to observe Victor's entire process from getting out of the car to entering the cafe. She needed every possible advantage. Victor arrived on time, stepping out of a black luxury sedan, with the driver opening the door for him. He wore a custom suit, an expensive watch, exuding the aura of a successful person. Seeing Lydia already there, a flash of surprise crossed his eyes, but he quickly regained composure. "Lydia." He opened his arms to hug her, performing the act of old friends reuniting. Lydia sidestepped, sitting directly opposite. "Sit down." Her tone left no room for doubt. Victor awkwardly retracted his arms, appraising her simple attire, a subtle contempt flashing in his eyes. "You look good," he said insincerely. "Not as good as you." Lydia stared into his eyes. "These 5 years, you've been thriving." Her gaze was like a knife, trying to peel away the true face beneath his glamorous exterior. Victor sighed, his expression perfectly sorrowful. Lydia, I know you hate me, but back then, I had no choice. The company faced a huge crisis, you had to take responsibility, or we all would have been done for. I preserved myself to keep the company alive. His speech was clearly well prepared, smooth and persuasive. So you forged evidence and pushed everything onto me? Lydia's voice was terrifyingly calm. She noticed that when she said forged evidence, Victor's eye corner twitched slightly. Victor's face changed slightly, lowering his voice. Watch your words, Lydia. The court has already ruled, this matter is over. What you need now is to start over, and I can help you. His tone carried a threat, hinting she shouldn't act rashly. How to help? Lydia raised an eyebrow. She wanted to see what price Victor was willing to pay to seal her mouth. I prepared some money for you, enough to buy a house in a small city and do some small business. Victor took out a check from his pocket and pushed it in front of her. The condition is that you leave this city and never come back. His gaze became sharp, with an uncompromising resolve. Lydia glanced at the number on the check, 500,000. How generous, it wasn't even enough for one of his current watches. This amount to buy off her 5 years of youth and reputation was simply an insult to her. She chuckled lightly, tearing the check in half, then into fragments, scattering them on the table. The action was slow and firm, each tearing sound a challenge to Victor's authority. I will leave this city, she stood up, but not before getting everything I deserve. Her voice wasn't loud, but every word was clear and distinct, like a declaration of war. Walking out of the cafe, Lydia knew the war had begun. Victor's gaze told her he wouldn't let her go easily. Not accepting his charity meant he would definitely take measures to guard against her counterattack. She had to find a job quickly, settle down, and then start gathering evidence. The sunlight shone on her face, she took a deep breath, feeling the dangerous aura in the free air. This battle would be harder than she imagined, but she was prepared. However, things were harder than she imagined. Lydia updated her resume, highlighting her technical skills and entrepreneurial experience, but mentioning nothing about her criminal record or CS technology experience. She sent out dozens of applications, a few companies were interested in her background and invited her for interviews. Each time, she wore her most appropriate clothes, striving to showcase her professional abilities. But whenever the interview reached the background check stage, once they discovered her criminal record, they would politely decline. This must be Victor's doing, he had surely greeted major companies in the industry. Victor's influence was greater than she anticipated, he had almost blocked all her employment channels. A month passed, and Lydia had almost spent all her savings but still couldn't find a job. She had to move from the rented single room to a cheaper basement dwelling, eating the simplest food every day. From entrepreneurial elite to social underclass, this disparity was enough to crush most people. The basement was dark and damp, with only a small window above ground level letting in some light. Every morning, she could hear the footsteps of pedestrians on the street above, the sound of cars passing, and the city's busy rhythm. Yet she was excluded from this world. This physically low position symbolized her status in society. Sometimes, in the dead of night, she would doubt her decision. Perhaps she should accept the 500,000, go to a small city to start over, forget past grievances, forget former dreams, and live like an ordinary person. But whenever this thought arose, she would recall Victor's hypocritical expression in court, the countless long nights in prison, and her parents' disappointed eyes outside the visitation window. No, she couldn't give up. Even if the road ahead was tough, she had to keep going. Hatred had become her motivation to live, and justice was her only goal. Just when she was almost at a dead end, a job advertisement caught her attention. Changing Group is hiring special talents, no background restrictions, merit-based only. Changing Group, an emerging tech giant in the industry, known for daring innovation and breaking conventions. More importantly, it was a direct competitor to CS technology. This might be her only opportunity, and the best platform for counterattack. Lydia carefully prepared her resume, this time, she didn't hide her experiences but attached a letter at the end, candidly telling her story without naming names. I was once a co-founder of a tech company, with rich technical and management experience. However, framed by my partner, I spent 5 years in prison. Now regaining my freedom, I long for an opportunity to prove myself. I don't ask for sympathy, only a fair competitive platform. After sending the resume, she held little hope. After all, which company would hire someone with a criminal record? Especially in the tech industry, where background checks are extremely strict. Unexpectedly, she received an interview notice the next day. The HR on the phone was professional and friendly, as if her criminal record was not an issue at all. This gave Lydia a glimmer of hope, perhaps there was still fairness in this world. On the interview day, Lydia wore her most decent clothes, still styles from 5 years ago, but ironed flat and clean. Standing in the lobby of Changqing Group headquarters, watching the elite employees coming and going, she suddenly felt a wave of inferiority. These people were fashionably dressed, hurrying along, discussing technological innovations she had missed in 5 years. She felt like an outdated product, left far behind by the times. But she quickly straightened her back. She had once been one of them, even better than them. Everything she lost, she had to reclaim herself. This self-suggestion became her daily required lesson, supporting her crumbling self-esteem. Next, Lydia. The receptionist called her name. The interviewer was the technical director Michael, a man around 40 with sharp eyes. He carefully reviewed Lydia's resume and asked many professional questions, which Lydia answered fluently. Although she hadn't touched the latest technology for 5 years, her foundation was solid, her learning ability strong, and she had crammed a lot of new knowledge during interview preparation. Your professional skills are outstanding, Michael put down the resume, looking directly into her eyes, but I've checked, you have no work experience in the last 5 years. What were you doing during this time? This question hit the nail on the head, and the atmosphere in the conference room immediately tensed. Lydia took a deep breath. I was imprisoned for commercial crimes and just released after serving my sentence. She chose to face the issue directly rather than evade it. This was her decision after repeated thought. Honesty might be her only advantage. The conference room fell silent. Michael's expression unchanged, he just leaned forward slightly. Can you tell me the specifics? His tone held no judgment, only curiosity. So Lydia briefly told her story, without mentioning Victor or CS Technologies' names, just saying she was framed by her partner. She tried to remain objective, without personal emotions, stating only facts. During the telling, she observed Michael's reactions, trying to gauge his attitude. Why choose to tell us the truth? You could have concealed it. Michael asked a key question. You would do a background check, concealing has no meaning. Moreover, Lydia met his gaze. I don't want to live in lies anymore. This was her sincere words. 5 years of injustice made her abhor lies. Michael pondered for a moment, then unexpectedly said, come for the second round interview tomorrow, meet our CEO. A subtle smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He's very interested in your situation. Lydia felt a trace of unease, but also a glimmer of hope. At least, she had gotten an opportunity. The second round interview was even tougher. Besides technical assessments, there were psychological evaluations and stress tests. At the end, Lydia almost thought she had failed again. The interviewers' expressionless faces made it impossible for her to judge her performance. However, a week later, she received the offer letter for the position of junior technical analyst. Though not her former management role, it was already a start of hope. More importantly, the company clearly stated they didn't mind her past, valuing only her abilities. This tolerance almost brought her to tears. What surprised her more was that on her first day, she was directly called to the CEO's office. This was unusual, a junior employee typically wouldn't receive a personal meeting with the CEO. Her heart was full of questions, but she vaguely felt this might be the start of her fate's turning point. Changqing Group's CEO office was on the top floor, overlooking the entire city. When Lydia entered, the CEO was facing away from the door, gazing at the city landscape outside the floor-to-ceiling window. That back looked somewhat familiar, making Lydia uneasy. When the person turned around, Lydia almost exclaimed. "Senior Adrian?" Adrian, her university senior 4 years ahead, a genius in the computer department, a campus legend. After graduation, he started a business and reportedly achieved great success quickly, unexpectedly. It was Chinching Group. In university, Adrian had been someone she admired. They had clashed in an entrepreneurship competition, with Lydia's team unexpectedly winning, causing quite a stir at the time. "Lydia, long time no see." Adrian smiled and gestured for her to sit. "I remember you were the champion of the entrepreneurship competition back then, defeating my team." His smile was warm and sincere, unlike Victor's, which always wore a mask. Lydia was somewhat embarrassed. That was a long time ago. She felt a daze. Fate had reunited them in this way. "I've seen your file and know about your matter," Adrian said straightforwardly. "I believe you were framed." His tone was affirmative, without any hesitation. Lydia was stunned. Why? She couldn't believe someone would so easily believe her innocence. Even her parents had doubted her. "Because I know your character, and I know Victor's." Adrian's gaze sharpened. "I've dealt with him. That person is shrewd but lacks integrity." He walked to the window, back to Lydia. "The tech circle isn't big. CS Technology's rise was too fast, too perfect. I've always felt there was something wrong." Hearing Victor's name from someone else's mouth, Lydia's heart tightened suddenly. So Adrian had known everything all along. This interview might not be a coincidence at all. "I need evidence," she said. This was her biggest predicament. Without evidence, her accusations were just slander. "Then go find it." Adrian turned around, walking to the window. "I can provide you with a platform and resources, but proving your innocence must be done by yourself. This is also why I hired you. Chinching needs resilient talents like you, and you need an opportunity to prove yourself." His candor surprised Lydia and earned her respect. Thus, Lydia began her work at Chinching. She worked harder than anyone, arriving earliest at the office every day and leaving latest. She not only had to prove her value but also secretly gather intelligence on Victor and CS Technology. Adrian provided her with certain conveniences, such as access to some databases, but never directly participated in her investigation. This distanced support gave her space while protecting the company's interests. In the initial weeks at Chinching Group, Lydia kept a low profile. As a junior technical analyst, her work mainly involved data processing and report writing. But she never limited herself to her job scope. Every day after work, she would stay to study the company's technical documents, understanding the products Chinching was developing and the challenges faced. She found the company had hit a bottleneck in artificial intelligence algorithm optimization, which was exactly her expertise. In prison, though without a computer, she kept up with technological developments through reading books and papers, even generating some unique ideas. One Friday evening, most employees had left, but Lydia still sat at her desk, contemplating the code on the screen. She discovered a possible optimization scheme, but it required adjusting the core algorithm. This was a risky attempt. If failed, it might affect system stability, but if successful, it would greatly enhance product performance. "Not off work yet?" A voice came from behind. Lydia turned and saw Adrian standing there, suit jacket draped over his arm, seeming ready to leave. He often worked late. Such encounters were not the first. "Have an idea, want to verify it," she answered simply. Although Adrian supported her a lot, she remained cautious, not wanting to overly rely on his goodwill. Adrian approached and looked at her screen. "This is our core algorithm module. What idea do you have?" His tone carried curiosity, not doubt. Lydia briefly explained her optimization idea. Initially, Adrian's expression was politely interested, but as she explained, it became focused. Lydia's idea was bold and innovative, challenging the existing technical framework. "This idea is innovative." He pulled over a chair and sat down, "but implementation carries risks, possibly affecting system stability." He pointed out several potential issues, demonstrating his profound technical foundation. I can test it on a small scale first. Here are the simulation results. Lydia brought up a window, showing the preliminary simulations she had already done. She had anticipated questions, so she prepared in advance. Adrian carefully examined the data, looking up at her in surprise. When did you do these? The simulation results were impressive, showing a potential performance increase of over 30%. After work. Lydia said softly. I know my position, shouldn't overstep, but if this optimization is really effective, it can save the company a lot of computing resources. She maintained a humble attitude, not wanting to appear overly confident. Adrian pondered for a moment. At Monday's technical meeting, you present this. This decision was bold, letting a junior employee report on core technology improvements at an important meeting. Lydia was stunned, but I'm just a junior analyst, and at Chinching, ability is more important than seniority. Adrian stood up. Prepare well, many will question you. As he left, his eyes carried expectation. That weekend, Lydia hardly left her apartment. She perfected the algorithm model, prepared presentation materials, and anticipated all possible questions. This was an opportunity and a challenge. If successful, she would establish herself in the company. If failed, she might lose this hard-won job. At Monday's technical meeting, when Adrian announced Lydia would present the new algorithm optimization scheme, the conference room immediately buzzed with whispers. Who is she? The new junior analyst? Why let her do such an important presentation? Lydia took a deep breath, ignoring the doubting gazes, and began her presentation. Initially, the audience carried doubt and contempt, but as the presentation deepened, the room gradually quieted. Her ideas were clear, data strong, and she answered questions calmly. When she showed the simulation results and data comparisons, several senior engineers leaned forward, seriously taking notes. They shifted from doubt to interest, finally to admiration. The scheme proposed by this young woman solved problems that had troubled them for months. After the presentation, the conference room was silent. Then, technical director Michael started clapping, followed by more applause. Lydia saw Adrian at the end of the table nodding slightly, with an approving expression. After that day, Lydia's status at Chinching quietly changed. She was allowed to participate in more core projects, with more opportunities to access key technologies. At the same time, she began secretly gathering intelligence on CS technology, using company resources to analyze competitors' technical routes. She felt she was getting closer to the truth step by step. The opportunity came soon. CS Technology was about to launch a new generation of artificial intelligence products, claiming a revolutionary breakthrough. Chinching Group was also developing similar products but progressing slightly behind. Adrian decided to form a special team to study CS Technology's technical route, with Lydia naturally becoming a core member. This gave her a legitimate chance to investigate Victor's company. While analyzing public materials, Lydia found that CS Technology's new product was extremely similar to a concept she and Victor had jointly conceived during university. That concept couldn't be realized then due to technical limitations, but now it seemed Victor had found a solution. More suspiciously, this technology was highly similar to Chinching's ongoing patented technology, as if CS Technology had known Chinching's research direction in advance. This algorithm architecture is familiar. One late night, Lydia murmured to the computer screen, almost exactly like what we designed back then. She brought up Chinching's technical documents for comparison and found the similarity astonishingly high. This algorithm architecture is familiar. One late night, Lydia murmured to the computer screen, almost exactly like what we designed back then. She brought up Chinching's technical documents for comparison and found the similarity astonishingly high. Suddenly, a thought struck her. If Victor was using their shared intellectual property, he was infringing on their rights. Although they co-founded the company, the core technology patents were registered in Lydia's name, Victor's idea at the time, citing it as a reasonable tax avoidance. Now it seems he may have planned all this, but simply didn't anticipate Lydia would retain the patents. Lydia immediately searched her old materials and finally found the patent files in an encrypted storage. Indeed, she was still the legal owner of these core technologies. This discovery made her heart race. It was her first powerful weapon. The next day, she took the patent files to Adrian. "We can sue him for infringement," Adrian said after reviewing the files, "but this requires time and resources. Moreover, Victor likely has evaded risks through some means." His concern was practical. Legal litigation often consumes time and effort, with unpredictable results. "I have other evidence." Lydia hesitated for a moment and finally decided to take out the USB drive saved for 5 years. This was her last trump card and biggest bet. If the data on the USB couldn't be recovered or couldn't prove her innocence, she might never turn things around. That evening, in Adrian's private studio, the technical team tried to recover the data from the USB drive. Due to its age, the data was severely damaged and needed time to repair. Lydia watched the technicians operate nervously. Every second was torment. "Give me a week," the chief technical expert said, "maybe I can recover part of the data." This uncertainty made Lydia anxious but also hopeful. During the wait, Lydia continued to work hard at Chinching. Her abilities gradually showed, not only proposing several key product improvement suggestions but also helping the team solve long-standing technical problems. Adrian appreciated her more and more. 3 months later, he promoted her to project leader. This promotion caused some controversy, but her performance left doubters speechless. The elevation in status gave Lydia opportunities to access more internal industry information and made her a thorn in Victor's side. She felt someone tracking her, with signs of her home items being rummaged. Victor had obviously realized her threat and started taking action. This covert struggle was escalating, with danger approaching quietly. The industry's annual awards banquet was one of the most important social occasions in the tech world. Lydia, as Chinching Group's rising star, accompanied Adrian. She wore a simple black evening gown, elegant without ostentation. This was her first high-end social event in 5 years, feeling slightly unaccustomed but mostly determined. As expected, Victor also attended the banquet, with his prominent wife. When he saw Lydia walking side by side with Adrian, obvious surprise and anger flashed in his eyes. He obviously hadn't anticipated Lydia appearing at such an event, let alone being close with his competitor. "Looks like you found a backer." Victor approached Lydia with champagne, his tone sarcastic. His smile was fake, eyes cold. "Does Adrian know his new favorite is an ex-convict?" He deliberately raised his volume, attracting nearby attention. Several nearby people turned to look, whispering. Lydia felt her face heat up but remained calm. "He knows everything about me, including how I was framed." Her voice was clear and firm, without any retreat. Victor's smile stiffened. "I've warned you, Lydia. Don't try to challenge me. What you have now, I can take away anytime." His threat was undisguised, showing his anxiety over Lydia's recent success. "Just like what you did 5 years ago?" Lydia countered fearlessly. This confrontation was inevitable. She preferred to face it head-on. Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think Adrian really cares about you? He's just using you to deal with me. Once you lose your value, you'll be abandoned again." His words were venomous, trying to undermine her trust in Adrian. "Maybe," Lydia smiled slightly, "but at least now, we have a mutual utilization relationship." She had learned the rules of survival in this cruel world, no longer naively believing in pure goodwill. Just then, Adrian came over, naturally standing beside Lydia. "Victor, what are you chatting about?" "Not poaching my talent, are you?" His tone was light, but his eyes alert. Victor immediately put on a business smile, "Just catching up with an old friend." Adrian has a keen eye, finding such excellent talent. He emphasized talent meaningfully, hinting at Lydia's background. Their gazes clashed in the air, full of gunpowder. The surrounding guests felt the tense atmosphere and turned to look. Lydia realized this public confrontation marked the intensification of her war with Victor. After the banquet, Adrian drove Lydia home. In the car, he suddenly said, "Victor is investigating Chinching's financial status. he might want to make a move against us. His expression was serious, showing the gravity of the situation. We need to strike first, Lydia said. Passive defense was never her style, especially against an opponent like Victor. Adrian nodded. The data recovery is almost done. Are you ready to face the truth of the past? He referred to the data about to be recovered from the USB, which might contain decisive evidence. Lydia looked at the flowing city lights outside the window and nodded gently. No matter how cruel the truth, she must face it. Only by uncovering past wounds could they fully heal. A week later, the technical team successfully recovered part of the data from the USB. Adrian and Lydia reviewed the results in a secure conference room, the atmosphere tense. As files were opened one by one, the truth gradually surfaced, more cruel than Lydia imagined. The recovered data showed that Victor not only forged evidence to frame Lydia but also long-term embezzled company funds, falsifying accounts to cover deficits. More shockingly, CS Technology's so-called independent R&D core technologies in the last 3 years were actually stolen from competitors, including Chinching Group. The data included copies of multiple confidential files and Victor's communication records with commercial spies. This evidence is enough to put him in prison for over 10 years. Adrian said after reviewing. His expression was complex, with excitement of impending victory and disappointment at the industry's dark side. Lydia, however, didn't feel the expected joy. For 5 years, revenge was her motivation to live, but now facing this opportunity, she hesitated. Destroying Victor meant destroying the lives of many innocent employees. CS Technology had thousands of staff who shouldn't pay for Victor's crimes. Give him a way out, she said unexpectedly. Adrian looked at her in surprise. Are you sure? He never gave you one. His surprise was normal. Few would show mercy to their greatest enemy. I'm not him. Lydia took a deep breath. We can use this evidence to negotiate, make him hand over company control, leave the industry. Give him a chance to start over, just like I once needed. This decision wasn't from weakness but from strength. She didn't want to become another Victor, solving problems destructively. Adrian pondered for a long time and finally agreed. This is your decision, I respect it, he said, but we must ensure he can't hurt anyone again. Lydia nodded. This plan could make Victor pay the price while minimizing harm to innocents. Perhaps this was the difference between maturity and youth, no longer obsessing over complete destruction but seeking relatively just solutions. The negotiation was arranged in Chinching Group's conference room. Victor came in aggressively with his legal team, but when Lydia laid out the evidence before him, his face turned pale. Seeing those files he thought had been destroyed, he realized the game was over. You have 2 choices, Adrian said calmly. 1 is we hand these to the police, 2 is you sign this agreement, voluntarily resign all positions at CS Technology, transfer equity to Lydia, and promise never to enter this industry again. The agreement was ready, with clear and strict terms. Victor stared fixedly at Lydia. You've planned this all along, haven't you? From the day you got out, waiting for this moment. His voice was full of anger and reluctance, but more fear. His carefully built empire was collapsing. I've never planned anything, Lydia replied, just that the truth always comes out. Her calm contrasted sharply with Victor's agitation. In this long struggle, she finally occupied the moral and strategic high ground. Victor's lawyer carefully read the agreement and whispered to him to accept the terms. Faced with irrefutable evidence, litigation would only bring more severe consequences. After a long internal struggle, Victor finally signed the agreement. His signature lacked its former confidence, the strokes trembling, as if he had aged 10 years in an instant. CS Technology officially returned to Lydia's hands. She decided to merge the company with Chinching to form a new tech group. This decision received unanimous approval from both boards. The merged company would become a new industry giant. On the day of the press conference, Lydia stood under the flashes, calmly recounting her experiences. When she announced the establishment of a foundation to help people with criminal records re-enter employment, the room erupted in applause. Her story became the media focus, but this time not as a criminal, but as a hero who overcame adversity. After the conference, Adrian found her. "Someone wants to see you." In the lounge, Lydia saw her parents, unseen for 5 years. Her mother's eyes were teary, her father's expression complex. Time had left marks on their faces, but the love and guilt in their eyes were clear. "Lydia, I'm sorry," her mother hugged her, "we should have believed you back then." Her voice choked, unable to continue. Lydia patted her mother's back, her gaze meeting her father's. The old man lowered his head and softly said, "I'm proud of you, daughter." This simple sentence dissolved 5 years of estrangement and pain. At this moment, Lydia felt a frozen corner deep in her heart finally melt. Forgiving others is also liberating oneself. Family recognition satisfied her more than career victory. Half a year later, the new group was on track, with Lydia as vice president. She bought an apartment near the company, finally bidding farewell to that basement. While moving, she flipped out the old iron box again and picked up the photo of her and Victor. Once, hatred was her motivation to live. But now, she had learned to let go. She didn't throw away the photo but put it back in the box, sealing it with other memories. The past couldn't be changed, but she could choose how to face the future. Outside the window, the city lights were just coming on. Lydia picked up a glass of red wine and took a gentle sip. She was back, no longer the vengeful avenger full of hatred, but truly reborn. The doorbell rang. Adrian stood outside, holding a bottle of champagne. "Celebrate?" "Just got the quarterly financial report, we broke records again." Lydia smiled and welcomed him in. The two stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, overlooking the brilliantly lit city. 5 years ago, she couldn't imagine standing here. Now, it all felt so natural. "What's the next plan?" Adrian asked. Lydia looked into the distance, her eyes sparkling. "Change the world, little by little." This answer was both humble and ambitious, reflecting her new mindset, no longer eager to prove herself, but focused on truly important impacts. Adrian smiled. "Sounds like a good plan." The wine glasses clinked lightly, emitting a crisp sound. After the backlight, dawn finally appears. Lydia knew her new life was just beginning. This time, she would write a different ending in her own way.